This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry, entitled A 2022 Review of the Farm Bill Stakeholder Perspectives on Title II Conservation Programs, will come to order. Welcome and thank you for joining today's hearing. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open for questions. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. Good morning, and thank you so much for being at this hearing. I'm excited for today's hearing, emphasizing stakeholder perspectives on Farm Bill conservation programs. American farmers and producers have a long history of being among the best stewards of our land and promoting conservation practices as a way of protecting our environment for generations to come. Ensuring that they have the tools they need to best take care of the land for today and for future generations is critical to the policy decisions that we make in this committee. And I hope that we can use today's conversation as an opportunity to listen and learn from our producers and growers about what they need as we head into drafting the 2023 Farm Bill. As part of today's hearing, we will hear how our conservation programs are currently working for producers, how investments in conservation programs are addressing our resource needs, and how these programs can be utilized to help address the climate crisis. I am pleased that we are hearing from producers, conservation professionals, and advocates who understand today's evolving challenges, from water scarcity to increased input costs in raising everything from cattle to wheat. I appreciate that today's witnesses have taken the time away from their important work to discuss the current state of Farm Bill conservation programs so that we can make informed policy decisions that will make the programs easier for producers to use to address their resource concerns while also providing environmental, social, climate, and overall economic benefits. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses. I'd now like to welcome the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for any opening remarks he would like to give.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. I'm glad we got a chance one more time to discuss the 2018 Farm Bill conservation title. The Title II programs are voluntary and incentive-based, providing direct benefits to producers, their operations, and the land itself. The delivery of the Farm Bill's conservation programs is a proven model that we know works and will continue to be important for the long-term success of our farmers, ranchers, growers, and the rural areas nationwide. Since the 1985 Farm Bill, conservation programs have continued to evolve to better support American agriculture with some of the most significant reforms in just the past two reauthorizations. This includes program consolidation and streamlining, which have improved the delivery of conservation programs by making them simpler and easier for the producers to navigate. The committee has worked hard to keep these programs producer first while protecting mandatory funding for essential programs. As this committee begins crafting the next conservation title, I'm hopeful we can build on these reforms and maintain the emphasis and support for working lands, programs, and farm infrastructure. Since the beginning of this Congress, there has been a lot of attention placed on environmental regulations, soil health, and ways that farm conservation programs can help sequester more carbon. Through a variety of recent actions, significant new funding for so-called climate-smart activities, and several main Farm Bill conservation programs that has been made available or will be soon. Specifically, this includes a $3.5 billion climate-smart practices pilot program USDA is currently administering. This funding is being released unilaterally and comes with no mandate, direction, or authorization from Congress on how to actually distribute it. In addition, this new funding comes on top of the most recent reconciliation package passed last month, which provided roughly $20 billion for 4 conservation programs. So since it's not clear how this new funding will be obligated or specifically utilized by the department, this committee must conduct oversight as USDA administers an enormous amount of taxpayer dollars, especially with a new Farm Bill on the horizon. In light of this, the House Ag Committee must be mindful of this massive amount of funding before amending programs and making policy changes that reorient conservation programs more towards climate mitigation. Make no mistake, USDA conservation programs do provide numerous environmental benefits, including for soil health. However, no one natural resource concern should be prioritized over others considering all the benefits and good work these programs presently support. Instead, Congress can't lose focus and must maintain our support for the long-held promises of Title II programs to meet our broad environmental and conservation goals and the needs of the producers. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses who participated today. We look forward to the testimonies and a thorough conversation on Title II. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
I now recognize Ranking Member Thompson of the full committee for any opening comments he'd like to make.
Well, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, thank you both for holding this hearing. This is the work of this committee should be doing as we prepare for the next Farm Bill. I am excited to hear from stakeholders about what is working and what isn't, and to hear more about what direction the title should take. Now, I've been a longtime supporter of our Farm Bill conservation programs. I was honored to serve as chairman of this subcommittee during the 2014 Farm Bill process, and we can all be proud of the bipartisan work we did in this title in both 2014 and 2018. But I have to tell you, folks, the way the majority in this administration has gone on an unprecedented spending spree with little to no input from Republicans and stakeholders have led to a situation where I think could endanger the bipartisan support of this title. In just the last month, Democrats have spent nearly $20 billion on conservation programs, and then the Biden administration has doubled down and spent $3.5 billion from the CCC on projects to make our food system align with corporate climate agendas. These actions are not good for the long-term viability of these programs. I hope in the next Congress, we can truly evaluate the funding needs for these programs, paired with an evaluation of the ability to effectively and judiciously deliver these funds to farmers. After making this evaluation, we can talk about what the real needs are for the title. Now, I don't feel bound by the amount of funding or to the specific program allocation passed in the partisan IRA bill. I especially am worried about the earmarking of all the new money just for climate rather than letting the locally led process work. Let me talk about some of my goals for the title. First, the producer should be at the center of any discussion. We want the conservation title to work for the producer and help not only provide environmental outcomes, but also good economic sense. We should also ensure that these programs are easy for producers to understand and access. We should look at ways to streamline and simplify our conservation programs. We should improve upon those aspects in CSP and RCPP, but the Conservation Reserve Program should be a part of that discussion. Second, I will not prioritize climate over every other natural resource concern, period. Third, I would like to see innovative solutions, whether that is emphasizing technology such as precision agriculture like we have done in the PRECISE Act or Mr. Davis's No Admits Act or my own Sustains Act. We as a party will be the party of solutions. Fourth, we should emphasize working lands. Republicans have emphasized working land programs for the last 2 decades, even before it became popular in the conservation community. EQIP has been the workhorse and most popular of all programs, and we should be judicious in any changes we make to EQIP. Fifth, we should look at ways to improve our conservation delivery system. The Technical Service Provider Program is broken, and we should look at ways to improve that program to ensure that we have enough technical capacity on the ground, or quite frankly, in the fields. Six, we should ensure private working forest lands are a part of our conservation title, and I will look for innovative ways to include working forests into these programs. In closing, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. We have a great panel of witnesses today, and I look forward to continued oversight of these programs to evaluate how these programs can continue to provide the conservation benefits it has for decades. And I hope we can do that in a bipartisan way. I believe we can, and look forward to that instead of what's happened over the last 2 years. With that, Madam Chair, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much to the ranking member of the full committee, and thank you for always coming to our hearings, participating, and continuing to be so focused on this title and the programs that are a part of it. I am pleased to welcome our witnesses to the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry of the full Agriculture Committee today. Our first witness today is Mr. Michael Crowder, who is the president of the National Association of Conservation Districts. Our next witness is Ms. Nicole Berg, who is the president of the National Association of Wheat Growers. Our third witness is Ms. Lori Faith, who is the Senior Director of Government Relations at the Land Trust Alliance. And our fourth and final witness today is Mr. Shane Weiss, a rancher from Iowa, and he's testifying today on behalf of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Thank you all for joining us today. You will each have 5 minutes to deliver your testimony. There's a timer that should be visible in front of you, and it will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. Mr. Crowder, please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member Lamotha, Member Thompson. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to discuss Farm Bill conservation programs. My name is Michael Crowder, and I serve as president of the National Association of Conservation Districts. NACD represents America's 3,000 conservation districts across the nation and the 17,000 men and women who serve on their governing boards. Conservation districts are local units of government that coordinate with many partners at all levels to help millions of cooperating landowners and operators implement conservation practices. Producers are on the front lines of maintaining global food security and protecting our country's natural resources. Conservation districts play a critical role in achieving these goals by providing producers with the resources and assistance they need to implement effective conservation practices and enhance their operations. If there is just one message I want you to take away from my testimony today, it is that voluntary, locally led, incentive-based conservation works. USDA conservation programs have helped producers and private landowners across the country reduce soil erosion, enhance water quality, air quality, reduce carbon emissions, and so much more on millions of acres. These benefits extend well beyond the farm and have improved environmental health of entire communities and regions. Earlier this year, NACD established a Farm Bill task force, for which I chair, to assess conservation programs and to help Congress with development of the upcoming Farm Bill. Like NACD, our task force represents a wide range of agricultural operations, social demographics, and regions from across our country. The task force has held nearly a dozen meetings during which members have shared their perspectives on administration of conservation programs and suggestions to improve them. The task force has also developed NACD's Farm Bill principles to guide the development of our policy recommendations and have submitted these 11 principles as part of my testimony today. Throughout our meetings, members frequently express the need to support locally determined priorities. Our country's vast private lands differ greatly in respect to natural resources, production systems, and environmental conditions. This diversity requires strong, knowledgeable local leadership and the ability to adapt conservation programs to best fit producers' operations. We believe providing maximum flexibility to enable locally led approach and limiting nationwide carve-outs will best facilitate the success of conservation programs in all parts of the country. The task force has also raised concerns with one-size-fits-all policies. EQIP allows producers to select between more than 160 eligible conservation practices. This allows Midwest row crop farmers to implement cover crops or no-till, while Louisiana or California rice farmers can adopt practices to increase irrigation efficiencies. To be successful, producers need access to a comprehensive suite of conservation systems and practices. Members of the task force also expressed a desire for Congress to examine conservation practice payment rates. With rising costs of labor and inputs, we need to ensure that producers are compensated fairly and that the payment rates reflect the real-time cost of implementing practices. We also identified a need to simplify conservation programs and make their application processes as simple and as clear as possible. NACD has heard from stakeholders across the country that navigating the CSP and RCPP programs can be complicated and cumbersome from both a producer standpoint and from administrative perspectives. I would be remiss if I didn't mention conservation technical assistance. CTA is the bedrock of our conservation delivery system. The successful administration of these critical USDA conservation programs relies on effective conservation planning, a strong conservation workforce, and other resources that are supported by conservation technical assistance. As this committee works to develop the 2023 Farm Bill, NACD looks forward to working on a bipartisan basis to support and strengthen these programs. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and I very much look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowder. Ms. Berg, please begin when you are ready. You have 5 minutes.
Chair Spanberger and Ranking Member LaMaffa, thank you for the opportunity to testify today before the subcommittee. I'm Nicole Berg, a fourth-generation farmer from Patterson, Washington. I work in partnership with my father and my brothers, and we grow dryland irrigated winter wheat, bluegrass seed, field corn, sweet peas, green beans, and alfalfa. I currently serve as president of the National Association of Wheat Growers, a federation of 20 state associations and other industry partners. In my area of Washington, conservation is essential to our farming operation. Living and farming in the driest area in the world that grows cereal grains, with only 6 inches of rainfall a year, conservation farming helps us maintain soil moisture and efficiently use of natural resources. EQIP has helped us put in a fertilizer tank containment system and install irrigation water management equipment on our irrigated farmland. We utilize CRP on our dryland acres to create contours in the field, protecting the soils from wind erosion. In our dry, windy climate, we take multiple actions to protect the soil from erosion, including the use of no-till. The 2018 Farm Bill maintained a strong commitment to voluntary incentive-based conservation programs. The NRCS programs continue to be oversubscribed, with less than half of all applicants receiving NRCS funding nationwide. Reviewing wheat growers' use of NRCS programs between 2018 and 2021, wheat farmers entered over 7,500 contracts. Over the same period, there were 5,000 valid applications from wheat growers that went unfunded. There is continued demand and need for voluntary conservation programs in the Farm Bill, and we must make sure the programs continue to be flexible and allow farmers to maintain economic viability in their farming operations. The benefits of the Farm Bill conservation programs are significant in terms of the environmental benefits and the assistance to farmers. The technical assistance, planning and engineering, and financial assistance in the form of cost share or incentives provide farmers with the knowledge and economic incentive to make a change in their operation or maintain a conservation practice. Some of the challenges for wheat growers in utilizing conservation programs is typically diversifying the crops grown, low rainfall, complexity of programs, and transparency of the program requirements. Included in my written testimony is a list of concepts for the next Farm Bill, and I will highlight just a few. First, we'd like to improve the flexibility of conservation programs and expand conservation opportunities to early adopters and conservation management systems. Wheat is grown in almost every state in the U.S., but the crop rotations, climate, varieties of wheat, variety across each state, they vary differently. As you develop Farm Bill policy, please remember that one size does not fit all when it comes to conservation. Second, clearly articulate program changes so farmers understand Farm Bill modifications and other administration changes. As policies are developed through the Farm Bill reauthorization process, or even administration changes programs are implemented, these changes should be transparent and clearly articulated to farmers. Third, recognize the diversity of cropping systems, benefits of crop rotations, and timing of planting. Over the past 2 years, USDA offered a pandemic cover crop program that provided a discount to crop insurance for planting cover crops. When this program was introduced, winter wheat producers were not eligible for the program because the cover crop had to be planted over the winter, the same time our wheat is in the ground. Fourth, review cost share rates and payment limits due to the rising cost of inputs. The cost of farming has increased and it will continue to do so. While commodity prices have decreased recently, input costs remain high, with farmers facing higher costs in all areas of their operation, and the decision to adopt conservation practices can depend on the financial assistance of the Farm Bill programs provide. Fifth, expand training and mentoring and encourage retention of USDA field employees. The last few years have been difficult with the changes to the programs in the 2018, some of which were substantial, maintaining through the COVID-19 and training new staff and the challenge of leadership in FSA offices. In conclusion, wheat growers support continued access to voluntary incentive-based conservation programs in the Farm Bill. Wheat growers, the environment, and society have benefited from these programs through improved water quality and quantity, air quality, soil health, and habitat. These would not be possible without the financial and technical assistance that the Farm Bill conservation programs provide. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
That was perfect timing, Ms. Berg.
I have good staff.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and I now recognize Ms. Faith for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee, and Ranking Member Thompson. It is an honor to testify on behalf of the Land Trust Alliance and our 950-member land trusts. We are the voice of voluntary private land conservation, unifying the American ideals premised on initiative, landowner empowerment, and individual private property rights. Our members work with willing landowners, including farmers, ranchers, and foresters, to conserve their land. This not only allows landowners to fulfill their goals, it also boosts rural economies and ensures working lands remain in family hands. Land trusts have a long history of partnering with the USDA to help landowners utilize Farm Bill conservation programs. This partnership is vital to ensuring that working lands continue to produce food and fiber, provide habitat, protect watersheds, and serve as part of the climate solution. Working agricultural and forest lands are central to our nation's productivity and food security. Unfortunately, we are losing working lands at an alarming pace, which is why the Farm Bill conservation easement programs are so critical. While all the Farm Bill conservation programs are important, the easement programs, like the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, are the only ones that offer voluntary incentives to ensure working lands are not converted to other uses in the future. The money generated from the easement enables the landowner to pay off debt and reinvest in their farm or ranch. In addition, it can often make it easier for the landowner to resist outside development pressure and transfer the property to the next generation. Farm Bill easement programs are a good investment and make a significant contribution to the economy. The Alliance works through our Farm Bill Working Group to understand how Farm Bill programs are working and to develop recommendations for statutory and administrative changes. Our working group is comprised of more than 100 land trust practitioners from across the country who utilize Farm Bill easement programs to help landowners conserve their lands. They bring firsthand experience to our recommendations. The Alliance celebrated the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, which increased funding for ASAP. We thank you for what was accomplished in that bill, and although you provided a substantial increase in funding, it is still not meeting the demand from willing landowners who want to conserve their working lands within easement. We strongly support an increase in funding for the ASAP program in the 2023 Farm Bill to meet this demand. Beyond much-needed funding, the 2018 Farm Bill included important policy provisions to make the program more effective and efficient, such as flexibility with the match requirement and removing the onerous AIL plan requirement. The Alliance urges Congress to retain these important provisions and to provide additional clarification of intent through report language. In addition, we believe there is a need to make the certified entity application and enrollment process work more efficiently. This will leverage agency resources and provide a more efficient and streamlined path to conserving working lands. We further recommend recognizing certified entities across all NRCS easement programs. ASAP is a crucial tool for conserving farms and ranches, but does not address working forested lands. We recommend enhancing the Healthy Forest Reserve Program to establish a standalone forest conservation easement program that ensures private forest land remains intact and in production, allowing them to continue providing the numerous benefits to rural and urban communities. Conservation of our working forest lands is critical, and funding for forest conservation easements must be in addition to funding for ASAP. The Land Trust Alliance supports the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It is a key tool for Land Trust to help protect farm and ranch lands, grasslands, wetlands, and forested lands. We want to see consistency in how easements are implemented, whether through ASAP or RCPP. There is concern from the land trust community about the time it takes to get an easement approved through that program. We believe that only one easement has been closed under RCPP in the 4 years since the last Farm Bill was signed. Our Farm Bill Working Group continues to meet and explore options on ways the administration of this program can be improved, and we hope to work with this committee to ensure that goal. While I focus my testimony on the protection of working farmland, ranchland, and forest land, the Alliance supports all the programs in the conservation title. These investments provide a comprehensive portfolio of programs enabling our farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners to be the best possible caretakers of our soil and water resources while sequestering carbon and providing food, fiber, wildlife habitat, and clean air that we breathe. The Alliance is happy to provide our complete set of 2023 Farm Bill recommendations and looks forward to working with the committee to draft a strong bill that will ensure the future of our working lands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Faith. And Mr. Weiss, I welcome you here as someone who represents many wonderful cattle farms. It's a pleasure to have you join us. I work so frequently with the Virginia Cattlemen's Association, so I look forward to your testimony, and thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Shane Weiss, and I'm honored to join you today. I'm the 5th generation of my family's cattle ranch in west central Iowa, and we specialize in the production of high-quality Hereford bulls to sell to commercial cow-calf producers. But beyond our production focus, our operation has a strong conservation history. Weiss & Sons, my family's cattle ranch, is even a past winner of the NCBA's Environmental Stewardship Award. I'm proud to represent NCBA and the Iowa Cattlemen's Association today. Cattlemen graze livestock on approximately 666 million acres across the United States, nearly 1/3 of our nation's continental landmass. We strive to maximize the environmental, economic, and social sustainability of our operations. Through voluntary conservation programs, ranchers will continue to reach our shared conservation goals. Conservation programs are one of the most visible and consistently important portions of the Farm Bill for cattle producers across the country. Many cattle producers' only nexus to Farm Bill-related services occur at their local NRCS and FSA offices. The 2018 Farm Bill created opportunities for cattle producers across the country, but also new challenges. Cattle producers employ various conservation practices, many of which were put in place by using NRCS programs, such as EQIP. One important feature of EQIP has been its focus on livestock operations, and we appreciate the 50% funding designation for livestock-related practices in the 2018 Farm Bill. Federal funds spent on conservation are a good investment in our country's natural resources, and it is vital to ensure that livestock producers have access to these valuable resources for grazing and feeding management. While the intent of EQIP is to make conservation funding and technical assistance accessible to all producers, barriers to entry often disincentivize producers from using NRCS programs. Recently, my family's cattle ranch applied to receive EQIP cost share funding, but after months of waiting, we gave up and completed a water infrastructure project without the assistance of the USDA. I see many other opportunities for our ranch to improve the land and environment with EQIP funding. By creating additional hurdles for producers that want to use these programs, the committee and USDA limit access while also limiting the government's ability to record our environmental improvements. I urge the committee to support initiatives in the Farm Bill that allow NRCS programs to further innovation and common sense land management. Flexibility is key to ranchers' use of conservation programs. Ensuring that producers have the freedom to effectively manage their land goes beyond EQIP, stretching to other conservation programs like CRP. CRP has the potential to provide significant environmental benefit, but currently fails to maximize its value. Changes made in the 2018 Farm Bill limit our ability to effectively manage CRP acreage with grazing. Congress and the administration have made clear their interest in integrating climate-smart practices in the agricultural industry. Grazing is a valuable tool in maximizing carbon sequestration, but it is not a tool that we are able to use on CRP acreage without penalty. Livestock graze mature, stagnant grasses and allow regrowth of green, carbon-capturing plants. Our ranch took some land out of CRP and transitioned it into our cattle rotational grazing system recently. We have seen improvements on all pastures due to more grazing options. Grazing access to CRP acreage will promote more opportunity for beginning ranchers to graze responsibly and provide existing pastures more rest and recovery during drought years. Furthermore, grazing should be included as a CRP mid-contract management tool. Cattle and other forms of livestock can and should be the sustainable solution to managing CRP acreage. USDA's voluntary conservation programs have been a great asset to cattle producers, and it is important that these programs are implemented in a practical, producer-friendly, and voluntary manner for years to come. Ranchers across the country maintain open spaces, healthy rangelands, provide wildlife habitat, and we feed the world. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. Thank you for your time, and I would welcome any questions you have.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Weiss. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow for us to get to as many questions as possible. Please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. And I now begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And I want to begin with you, Mr. Weiss. I appreciated your testimony very much. And one of the things that in your written testimony and again in your spoken testimony, you talk about some of the hurdles that you and your family experience on your ranch. Could you just give us a brief rundown of what are some of those hurdles and how they preclude you from being able to use these programs in the ways that you would want to optimally?
Of course, thank you. For us, when we're deciding how to manage our cattle, we got to think of 3 things, and one is the environment, our cattle, our business, and even, I guess, our social life, our family life. So, some of the hurdles with like EQIP and CRP is just flexibility and timeliness. The EQIP program I referenced in my testimony, we were in a drought and we needed water infrastructure. We have to water our cattle. Mm-hmm. Our biggest dilemma with it was, I applied and we waited and finally we just had to bite the bullet and do it. I am one of the spoiled few in the cattle business that has a generational ranch that is set up with land, resources, and capital, so I can do that process of just buying that outright. Beginning ranchers and farmers don't have that in this current state of the business. So that was probably the main thing, is just the timeliness of EQIP. In terms of CRP, we're really, really big fans of it, but always having that worry of penalty if we do have to emergency graze or hay and our county isn't approved for that, mm-hmm. That's a hit to the business. It's a cash flow hit. So I think anything that provides flexibility for a business, anything that allows better grazing management from a cattle perspective, that's a win-win for everybody. The environment benefits, the producer benefits, and we benefit because we don't have the stress of dealing with drought or running out of grass and having to feed really expensive hay.
Yeah, and you've got the benefit of kind of the regrowth of that grass as you graze on that other on other fields. You also talked about just the overall benefits and how you view the program and the environmental, economic, and social sustainability of your operations. And I appreciated that commentary because so much of what it is that we're focused on with the conservation title, these voluntary programs, they're meant to do just that. They're meant to create opportunities for producers to be able to invest in their land, get support in kind of taking on new projects and programs that they might otherwise not be able to pursue that kind of have all of these significant benefits. I hear you on just the timeliness of a response because you make an excellent point. If someone doesn't have the capital at the ready, and you're constantly questioning how much and when do we just sort of pull the plug on the application and move forward doing what needs to be done. One of the consistent concerns that we heard from all of the witnesses related to technical assistance and the TSP program. So I was wondering, Mr. Crowder, perhaps because you were the first to bring it up, probably because you were the first to speak, could you speak to that a little bit? Notably, the ranking member also mentioned the shortcomings that we see in that program. What are some of the suggestions that you would bring to the committee in terms of, is it an issue of resources? Is it an issue of training? Is it an issue of prioritizing the workforce? What are some of the things you would want us to know? Sir, I think you need to turn your mic on.
I'm sorry. In May, we had a conservation careers.
Yes, thank you for being here with us then.
And we talked about the importance of the workforce. And during the hearing, the committee recognized that in order to address our current and future conservation needs, we have to bring new generations forward. And at this point, I'd like to plug that we have 13 members of our Next Generation Leadership Institute right next door. So we're doing our part, but we have to bring those new folks forward to the workforce. We've worked with Chief Cosby and others at the NRCS on conservation technical assistance grants to make sure we put boots on the ground, and we're doing a lot of work on the field to make sure that we have people in line to fill those positions at districts and at the NRCS.
Thank you very much. And as my time comes to a close, I just want to thank Ms. Berg for bringing the numbers to the table in terms of the 7,500 contracts that have been given, but the 5,000 unfunded for wheat growers across the country who have applied for programs. I think for all of us looking at what's the demand on the ground, we frequently say they're oversubscribed and underfunded, but noting that a significant number of growers across the country want to participate and want to benefit from these programs and simply can't, I think is a good call to action for us into the future. Thank you. My time has expired, and I now recognize Ranking Member LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Mr. Crowder, you mentioned in your testimony importance of forest management on federal, state, and private land. Please elaborate on how the Farm Bill programs can help support forest health. I find it interesting. As I came into the building, there was somebody's having a seminar down the hall about wildfire, and this points out in this brochure, which doesn't, it covers a broad area even around the world, but the highlight at the top is the 1 million acre Dixie fire, which occurred in my district last year. 1 million acres, one with 6 zeros behind it. I mean, that's many, many square miles of land. So can you speak to us how the conservation programs that are in the Farm Bill or that could be improved in the next Farm Bill would be helpful on what indeed are catastrophes like this?
I would mention that Nicole and I live in Washington State, so we share your fear of wildfires at all times. Matter of fact, we have the smoke from California, Oregon, Washington, B.C., so we understand the fear of living that, and I've had the fire bombers come right over my house, so I understand.
Ironically, that same smoke plume was making it all the way back here, B.C. and New York, and they were talking about, don't go outside days for health purposes for people that would normally do exercise. So.
Absolutely, sir. But as far as NACD supports forest health completely. We have a forestry resource policy group that we work with the Forest Service and the NRCS, and we have a lot of work going on with good neighbor authority, good forest health practices. The Inflation Reduction Act had approximately $5 billion for forestry work. And as we go forward with the 2023 Farm Bill, we want to help in every way possible to make sure that forest health becomes the forefront. We cannot have the fires that we've had. I've lived in Washington State for 20 years. The first 10 years we had very few fires. In the last few years, they're bigger, earlier, it's terrifying. So anything that we can do to help with forest management practices, help with at the local district level. We have programs like Firewise that we used on my ranch, where you come and evaluate and make sure that you get dead timber away from any combustibles away from the house. So there's a lot of work that is currently being done, but so much more that we can do to make sure that these giant fires are more controllable in the future, and if climate change or the more heat and dryness that we're seeing over the years continues, we're going to be fighting this for years to come.
Indeed, no matter what weather terminology you want to attribute it to, if we're going through a heat cycle, then we need to be doing more on forest management with the right amount of trees per acre that it can sustain with the available water underground as well as snowfall and such.
Yes, sir.
So let me shift to Mr. Weiss, correct? In speaking of this topic here, I think I sense some frustration with the limitation of livestock producers' ability to manage grazing on their acreage, or even coming back to the forestry side of it and other federal lands, getting the permits. I don't know how much that affects you in Iowa, but federal land permits for grazing have really, really tightened up, and we've seen this happen at the same time as fire acres have increased. You know, Mr. Crowder's kind of mentioning that too, is that we're seeing the number, you know, a big fire used to be 4 digits or even 5 digits. Now 6 digits is becoming routine. Touch on the grazing frustrations you might would acknowledge for us on getting those grazing lands.
I actually, as he was speaking of, managing timber and things along those lines, I immediately went to cows. We can use cattle and livestock as tools. It is an awesome sight to see when cattle take brown, stagnant, mature grass, timber, whatever it is, they eat it, they clear it out, and the green regrowth that appears from that is beautiful. And I think on a forestry side of things, cattle and livestock are a great solution. And it doesn't have to be a long graze that can inhibit the grassland. It just needs to be a short, intensive rotation that can clear that out, and everybody wins in that solution. The environment, the cattle, the business. Livestock are an incredible tool that we can use to help combat wildfire, promote photosynthesis to improve carbon sequestration. The cattle can be a tool. They aren't a hindrance, and I want to drive that fact.
Indeed, I've seen ideas of having a pilot program where we will do some grazing on some land and see what the fire suppression effects of that are. Like, I don't know, we need to be doing a pilot program where we can actually tell. You can see any place where a fire occurs and where there's grazing right up to the fence, the fire stops. Where there was no grazing, big time. So thank you for that, and I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And those questions were very interesting, as were the answers. The chair now recognizes Ms. Pingree for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having this hearing. It's such a important time to be discussing these programs as we look into the Farm Bill. And thank you to all the people testifying today. Really appreciate all of your thoughts. I'm going to start with Ms. Faith from the Land Trust Alliance. First, I just want to thank you generally for Land Trust Alliances. I come from the state of Maine, and they have played such an important role in all sizes of communities to preserve land that is important to those communities. And I just so much appreciate that you're there. But I do want to specifically talk about the farmland. And you talked about losing farmland. This was part of your focus. And I did see a report from American Farmland Trust that showed from 2001 to 2016, our nation lost or compromised 2,000 acres of farmland and ranch land every day. So that's just a staggering number, and we know it's getting worse, not better. So you talked a little bit about some of the conservation programs and, the speed. What else can you say that you haven't already done that we could be doing in the Farm Bill to improve this? I know that funding is key, so feel free to mention that again, but any other things you want to talk about?
Thank you. Yeah, the conservation easement programs are really critical, and that is, as I mentioned, the one tool that will allow willing landowners, those landowners who want to ensure that their working farm or forested lands remain in working hands in perpetuity. They are the key to food security in our country and to conserving farms and ranches and slowing down that pace of conservation. So increased funding is something obviously that we're advocating for. Other things would be simplifying and streamlining the certified entity application and enrollment process. There are two changes that Congress could do as part of the 2023 Farm Bill by clarifying the process to become a certified entity in statute and recognizing certified entities across all easement programs. We are talking with the agency about some administrative changes as well. So making this program work more effectively will require both statutory and administrative changes. The staffing issue, the capacity issue at NRCS and across the federal government is part of the problem for getting these dollars out on the ground to conserving farms, ranches. And so, we encourage you to be thoughtful about that as you go forward. And then clarification in the 2023 Farm Bill about some of the things that were achieved in the 2018 Farm Bill, either in statute or report language, like around things like the L plan, removing that onerous provision from the in the 2018 Farm Bill, and the way matching funds are handled will help streamline the programs as well. Thank you.
Sure, those are really, really helpful, and it would be great if you do follow up with more details to all of us. I think we're all interested in this. I also was interested, you mentioned something about including forestry, a forest health set aside. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too? I thought that was an important idea, and so many of us have forest lands in our district. Maine is the most forested state in the nation with a lot of private forest land, so that's a big interest to us.
Sure, thank you. We, in the 2018 Farm Bill, one of the things that wasn't addressed is the gap to provide an easement opportunity for working forested lands. So we are proposing enhancing the existing Healthy Forest Reserve Program to establish a new program called the Forest Conservation Easement Program. It would be a sister program to ASAP, where there would be forest land easements, so those would be entity-held easements, and then forest reserve easements focused on endangered species habitat and restoration of those lands, and those would be U.S.-held easements. We think this is a much-needed and important complement to the Farm Bill conservation programs. We'd like to see mandatory funding. We want to be really, really clear that in making sure that there's a working program for working forested lands, that we are not attempting to limit or reduce dollars for conservation of our farms and ranches. So we believe that any funding for a forest conservation easement program must be in addition to the funding for ASAP. And I'd be happy to provide more information.
Great, and thank you for that. I absolutely agree with you. We can't take money away from the farmland preservation. Mr. Crowder, you already covered this quite a bit, but I know it keeps coming up about the staffing issues, and I'm glad to hear you were mentioning young recruits. I don't have a lot of time, but anything else we need to do to support NRCS and having the capacity that it needs?
Well, in the 14 seconds I have, one of the big things is
One of the big things is the direct hire authority for NRCS. That's critical that we get boots on the ground. And then always comes back to conservation technical assistance, so we can do partnership work with districts and other organizations that can be those boots on the ground besides the NRCS folks.
Great. Well, I'm very supportive of both of those things. So I'll yield back. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. The chair now recognizes Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Good. Chairwoman Spansberger and Ranking Member LaMalva, thank you for holding this hearing today. And to our witnesses, thank you for being here and sharing with us as well. I'd like to begin my remarks by, recognizing our American farmers. They are the greatest conservationists in the world, and it is only with their lead that we can continue to protect our natural resources and habitats while also continuing to feed the world. Mr. Wise, I know a little bit about what you're dealing with. My dad managed the Georgia Hereford Farm right outside of Augusta, Georgia, when he returned from World War II. I was born and raised on that farm, and in fact, I have a picture of my dad standing with their champion bull in the sales barn. And at that time, that bull was purchased, I believe, by a big farm in the Midwest, Any chance that y'all bought a bull in 1949 outside of Augusta, Georgia?
I recommend the witness just say yes.
I would love to find that answer
Yeah,
out for you.
I want to know the answer
I'm a little too
too.
young for
Yeah.
that, but so.
Yeah, and I can't remember what my dad said that thing sold for, but it was a champion bull. So, but I also understand, what you're going through today. I mean, we've got the White House combined with my colleagues who are a real threat to the family farm today. And in the name of this climate god, of this new world religion, while it's very clear in the first chapter of the scriptures that we know who's actually in charge of the climate, and of course we know the planet is warming, but nobody can tell me what we're doing and how we're putting our economy and our farms at risk, trying to bring that temperature down and how much they can bring it down, but that's another subject. But you mentioned the CRP program and the flexibility. I've had the same problems, and Mr. Crowder, I've heard frequent complaints from my timber farmers that the CRP is too inflexible. And if landowners were provided the option to substitute land that is already under CRP contract with the same acreage of similarly environmental sensitive land, would there be cause for concern?
Mr. Allen, NACD supports CRP immensely. But I would say that we support that the most environmentally sensitive ground is prioritized. So prime farm ground would be of less priority in CRP. In Washington, we have some issues where CRP is overprescribed in some counties due to sage grouse initiatives. And that's one thing that it's more of a localized issue. But CRP is a great tool for farmers.
It is, but we've got to make it more flexible for them because things change. And you put these things in a program for long term. And but I've had problem after problem. People wanting to, for example, use the pine straw. People wanting to do other things like they have property that they need to flip, and they were willing in this case to even give more property to CRP, but the government turned them down. And so we've got to figure out in this next farm bill how to make that more flexible. Ms. Berg, if equip funds were allowed to be used to help pay for precision ag technology, would this help farmers address natural resource concerns and deliver environmental benefits according to the purpose of the program?
Absolutely. EQIP is definitely, EQIP is definitely a tool that farmers need out there to help integrate precision agriculture and technology to help manage the natural resources and promote soil health in our farming practices.
All right. And of course, I want to talk about the feral hog problem, but at first, Mr. Weiss, I got to ask you, I mean, what kept you from being able to get the water from the ground or wherever to water your cattle? And I don't know, y'all irrigated out there or non-irrigated? So you're dry land? Okay, well, in Georgia, we have to irrigate. But anyway, what was the holdup? I mean, was it the federal government?
Well, we water on a lot of ponds.
Yeah.
And the ponds were running dry.
Yeah.
So we were looking to run a water line to make an extra tank into that particular pasture. And the holdup was just the process. We applied, did all the paperwork, and
who did you apply to, the state or
the state? Yep.
Okay.
We waited, and nothing ever came about of it, and we got to water the livestock. So we just went ahead and bit the bullet and did it. And again, it wasn't ideal, but it's what we had to do.
All right. Well, sounds like you need some leadership in the state of Iowa there. All right. Well, I'll yield back, Madam Chairman.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Panetta for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Appreciate this opportunity to have this type of discussion with these experts to talk about many of our federal conservation programs, especially when it comes to protecting our farmlands and developing effective conservation practices. I hail from the Central Coast of California, the area that I represent, And obviously, we have a plenty of not just agriculture, but specialty crops, including 15% organic crops within that. Obviously, with the unique makeup of our agricultural landscape comes unique conservation challenges, especially when it comes to access to technical information and the upfront cost. Yet there's still plenty of work to do as we approach next year's Farm Bill to ensure that all growers, especially those left out of the status quo, like my specialty crop producers, that they're included in these types of very, very important conversations. Now, as we look to better protect our environment, of course, I firmly believe, and I think most people around this dais firmly believe, that farmers have a huge role to play as well as our government, so that we can provide the resources, the knowledge, the intellect that's critical in regards to the support that's necessary for our farmers and ranchers, especially those that are most impacted by the threats of climate change and environmental degradation. Now, I'd also like to obviously highlight the fact that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, provided close to $20 billion in direct support for the USDA's conservation programs within NRCS, a long overdue investment that will hopefully help our producers. And I look forward to continuing to work with this committee, with the Department of Agriculture, so that we can make sure that all farmers are able to benefit from these types of solutions. Mr. Crowder, obviously, you talk about certain programs and you focus on, obviously, conservation technical assistance, and you hit on EQIP quite a bit in that. Obviously, I hear often with my specialty crop producers, one size does not fit all. And I think we understand that and we believe that. Can you explain why programs should remain voluntarily so that it's important, and how it contributes to the success of the NRCS conservation programs?
Well, in our opinion, the voluntary aspect is the key. The government is not coming in telling any farmer what they need to do. The impacts that you get for these farmers to do water quality work, quantity work, benefits not only those farmers, but the neighbors, the community, and the millions of acres that have gone on. It creates an environment that is good for the United States. So one thing that comes to mind for your area and others is the access to the historically underserved. And one thing that I've been working on and talked to Chief Cosby and others is the signatory authority for conservation programs. And you have historically black farmers in the Southeast, you have tribal members, Pacific Islanders, and others, Latinos, that can't sign the conservation programs because they don't have access to clear title to their farm. So that's one aspect that we're working on, but EQIP and other programs, conservation programs, are just key to making sure that producers have the access to the programs that they need to be successful.
Okay, Mr. Weiss, directing my questions towards you, obviously the 2018 Farm Bill, I would say, empowered livestock producers to be better stewards of our natural resources. If given the chance, what would you want to see in the 2023 Farm Bill that would help us build on this work?
Thank you. I think, in reference to the 2018 Farm Bill, there were a lot of good, but there were a couple hurdles. For example, in terms of emergency haying and grazing CRP ground, if we hit a D3 drought, the ability to emergency graze and hay became more limited due to making sure there was proper amount of residual grass. So they swapped it over to payment per head. And by doing that, it almost formed inflation within the cattle business and just drove up the price of hay. So, we think we need to take a flexible approach where we have more options to graze, maybe reduce the penalty for grazing because that promotes better mid-contract management. Instead of, taking a tractor and spraying chemical or promoting burning of CRP ground, we can use cattle to do that for us. I think we just need to take a holistic approach where, again, the business, the cattle business, the conservation is there, the social aspects of thing is there, where all of it works together. So very subtle things, and obviously I'm not familiar with specifications due to my occupation, but I think anything that helps promote young cattlemen and cattlewomen and farmers and ranchers in general to have a business improvement and still make conservation a priority would be a win for everybody.
Fair
Thank
enough.
you.
Thank you. Thanks to all the witnesses. Madam Chair, I yield back.
And not seeing a minority member on, we're going to go to Ms. Schreier next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses. I'm particularly delighted to have two witnesses, Ms. Berg and Mr. Crowder, from my home state of Washington. It's wonderful to see you today, and you have both been excellent consultants and advisors for me and my staff. I'm excited to talk about these programs, which are so popular in my district because of their flexible, local-first approach, which really serves the diversity of Washington agriculture well. Look, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. What we need are common sense adjustments to ensure that these programs are serving our producers and their land well. And as funding for these programs increases, I think we need to find ways to decrease the burden on our farmers and growers and also on conservation districts. I've heard from producers that the application process for these programs is complicated and applying can feel like a full-time job in itself. And this is particularly frustrating given the low success rate of these applications. In fact, in 2020, only 30% of EQIP and 32% of CSP applications were accepted in Washington state. So for farmers who are already busy, applying to a complicated, oversubscribed program is just not the best use or an appropriate use of their limited time. So that's why many farmers depend on their local conservation districts for assistance, which puts pressure on them. They partner with NRCS and serve as the boots on the ground to make these programs work. Mr. Crowder, I have a couple questions for you, and then I'd like to pivot to Ms. Berg. First, what can Congress do to support conservation districts who are not only implementing projects, but also assisting farmers with applications and doing outreach to their communities about what services they provide?
Good to see you again, Congresswoman Schreier. NACD has a fantastic working relationship with USDA and NRCS, but one thing that I've talked about already, but I can't talk about enough, is the Conservation Technical Assistance and the Conservation Technical Assistance grants that we implement through the NRCS funding throughout districts, and that's gone to 50 states and 3 U.S. territories. And in the last 4 years, we've distributed about $50 million to districts directly towards staffing to help NRCS put boots on the ground to make sure those conservation plans are written for those conservation programs. So that's one thing that I would say that that we do a very good job of working with the NRCS on.
Thank you, and thank you for pointing out the need for staffing. And now, specifically about the application process, is there anything that we can do as we head toward the next year's Farm Bill for USDA and Congress to do to just simplify the application process to make it easier on farmers?
Yeah, as far as NACD's Farm Bill principles, one of our principles is clarifying and simplifying the application process. So we're happy to work with this committee, the full Ag Committee, and NRCS to make sure the applications for those programs are streamlined. You have so much money that are coming forward through Farm Bill, IRA, and infrastructure that it just simply has to be an easier process for farmers to make sure that their applications are processed going forward. And we're happy to work with this committee and others to do that at NACD.
Thank you. Last, I just want to highlight some challenges experienced by those using the CRP, which enrolls over 1.4 million acres in Washington state, which supports wildlife. You talked about the sage grouse and reduces soil erosion. Ms. Berg, you mentioned in your testimony that recent changes to the program, like reducing cost sharing and how rental rates are calculated, compounded by staffing shortages, made the most recent sign-up period even more complicated than normal. Can you also mentioned the need for additional training. What else can be done, and how would you do this kind of training? What can we do in Congress to change these programs and make them better?
I think, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. And I do think that there can be some changes set forth in the CRP program. One thing happened a couple years ago. There was over 200 different changes to the program. And ever since then, we've had a problem in our state, like interpreting the rules of the program. What are your expectations, laying out the expectations. And then also, I talk about staffing and trying to get the staff out to the farms or onto the CRP land and help us understand certified stands. How can we make the CRP a well-rounded part of our business plan? I know I don't have much time, so I'll make it short.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with Mr. Crowder, and I think we've seen just incredible improvements. Cover crop usage by American producers up 50% in recent decades. We've seen conservation tillage up 30% in recent decades. I've certainly seen a number of those evolutions on the ground in South Dakota. So, Mr. Crowder, to what extent do we feel like it's been Farm Bill programs, conservation programs that have really driven that adaptation, or are there other factors primarily to credit for that?
Well, I would say the Farm Bill programs are certainly the driving force for that. There's billions of dollars and millions of landowners that participate in that. A caveat is only 70 or 30% of the applications are funded. So there has to be a better avenue to fund those applications. We have to simplify the applications and make sure more of them are funded. Now, we have a lot of money coming from Inflation Reduction Act that will address that, and we'll see going forward with the 2023 Farm Bill how that's incorporated, or if it's incorporated, and see how that money affects the conservation that goes onto the ground.
So outside of the fact that only 30% are getting selected, what's the next largest barrier to further adaptation of these conservation practices?
Boots on the ground. We need more NRCS folks and more district folks and more people that help write conservation plans and process those applications. You know, if you only have if your 70% are not getting funded, not getting done, we have to make sure those conservation plans are ready on these fields, and districts stand ready to help with that. There'll be a lot of money coming forward here in the next 4 years for that. So if those conservation plans are ready, you can use those parallel tracks of Inflation Reduction Act money and Farm Bill money to put that conservation on the ground.
So I recently had a Farm Bill conservation roundtable in South Dakota, and I was surprised at the number of producers who told me at that roundtable that they felt like there had been so much turnover at NRCS and that so many of the new hires didn't really understand the conservation practices. They weren't really able to provide the level of technical assistance and advice that these producers were seeking. Mr. Crowder, do we hear that elsewhere, or was that more of a localized problem?
No, sir. You will see that everywhere. And the Great Recession through COVID is real. And it's not just NRCS, it's McDonald's, it's every business you deal with, you'll see that. But I know Chief Cosby and NRCS are working very hard to bring in a direct hire authority would certainly help that. We need to help NRCS get those folks on the field. They need to go to my farm and Nicole's farm and Mr. Weiss's farm and make sure they understand the processes that it takes, what the farmer needs. So they need to understand how to write those programs, but why us farmers, why us ranchers, why we need that. So yes, I agree with you. There's challenges at the local field office, but we know that and we're working on that, and I know the NRCS is working on that very hard to make sure that we address the needs of farmers and ranchers and producers.
Ms. Berg, with the minute I've got left, any reactions to any of my questions or Mr. Crowder's statements?
Just my reaction, you asked the question, are we seeing the technical assistance challenges across the countryside in the wheat industry? Absolutely. That's one of the biggest complaints we hear through our association is the lack of technical assistance, boots on the ground. And then when they do get boots on the ground, we've actually tried to approach them and say, hey, let's do some mentoring. Get some of these new staff members out to the farm. Let's go kick some dirt. Let's get them to understand the new technologies and the up and coming technologies that we would like to implement on our land. And some of these folks just need some training and need some help with some training.
Very good. Mr. Weiss, anything you want to add?
Thank you. I just shortly, I think one thing we need to also consider is trying to avoid multi-county conservation offices. I know in Iowa there's a couple counties that have to double dip, or offices that have to double dip via counties, and I can only imagine in larger states like New Mexico or South Dakota where they got to travel very far to get to their NRCS office. That is a hindrance, I think, in terms of knowledge too. So funding, I agree with everything we've stated. We've got to get boots on the ground, inform everybody, and have less variability amongst offices.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. O'Halloran for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, for holding this meeting today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak more from our hear more from our stakeholders and their experience with Title II conservation programs. Conservation of our nation's natural resources continues to be a top priority of mine in the upcoming Farm Bill. And it should be no surprise to anybody that we're having a problem with getting personnel out into the field. We've gone through cuts after cuts after cuts over multiple years and seeing that number decrease at the expense of conservation, of the rancher, the farmer, and others who need these programs with enough personnel to make them effective. With the current conditions in the Colorado River Basin, Arizona continues to experience the worst drought in the past 1,200 years, detrimental to our agriculture industry. And I fully expect that conditions may worsen considerably before they get better, which is why these conservation programs are even more important to farmers and ranchers in my district. We must provide farmers and ranchers the tools they need to continue to do good work and be good stewards of the land. Mr. Crowder, farmers in my district tell me that making big changes to they are making big changes to farms that increase resilience to extreme weather like drought takes a lot of time, often multiple seasons. Do you see what do you see as the best tools in the toolbox of the NRCS programs for addressing the length of time it takes to implement these changes?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, is that so can I have you clarify your question as far as the length of time? Is that how long it takes to get from application to on the ground conservation work?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Simply, that's more people on the ground. That's more people writing applications. And I don't want to sound like a broken record today, but direct hire authority for more employees at the NRCS and conservation technical assistance dollars for NACD and other applicants. It is a process, and the government has an oversight to make sure that those funds are approved appropriately and that they're put on the ground appropriately. But we've been doing this a long time. NRCS has been doing this a long time. They know what needs to be done as far as the practices on the ground. There's 167 practices, and we have priorities on that. And local working groups are great about prioritizing the highest needs in each area. So simply more people will help get conservation on the ground quicker.
Now, thank you. A follow-up, Mr. Crowder. From your experience, what program would you say is best positioned to help farmers in regions experiencing drought? And are there any adjustments that we could include in the next Farm Bill to improve upon this program and any other programs that you see need vast improvement.
Yes, sir. NACD, we support all of the conservation programs, but EQIP is the workhorse of the traditional conservation programs. CSP rewards early adopters, and you can take it to the next level. But EQIP is a program that can help with irrigation efficiencies and on and on. So that would be the workhorse of the conservation programs.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end my remarks by just saying that I don't think any of us on this committee are surprised by the fact that we need more personnel in the field, more people working faster to be able to get to the point where we're able to address the large amount of need out there in our farms and ranches across our country and conservation across our country. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you very much. In coordination with the ranking member, we're going to do a second round of questions. As of right now, it's the ranking member and I who are interested in another round. If any other members want to express interest, please do let us know. But we are going to begin with ranking member LaMalfa. I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. Ms. Berg, good to catch up with you here in our committee. We obviously see the water issue in the West is very acute. And so we've had water conversation titles in the past in the Farm Bill. What do you see that we need to improve upon in 23 to make, I mean, we need to talk about water infrastructure certainly, but when we're talking on the conservation side, what can we do to make our water go farther so agriculture can continue to thrive and be at the table to receive more water?
Thank you for that question. I do have an irrigated farm and do have concerns about water and water levels. One of the things that I think that we could do through these Title II conservation programs through NRCS is do a better job of how do we document water savings. So if we did an irrigation conversion from like real flood irrigation to like a drip irrigation, there's water savings. So how can we move forward and have more of an inventory control through NRCS on how are we saving, what are we saving, and not just necessarily acres treated. And so I think that that could help us have a better picture of were we saving water, how did these conservation programs.
Are you diplomatically saying that farmers don't get a lot of credit for when they do something better, like saving water or have more conservation practices that maybe produce less smoke from burning off, stubble and things like that? Or do you think we need a little more credit for that? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I absolutely think we need more credit for that.
Yeah, I've noticed that myself in farming. Let's talk a little about the, and it was alluded to, I think, by Mr. Allen earlier too, that we're having some problems with not enough of the, some of the staff that deals directly with these programs, understanding the system of farming, whether it's rotational practices, maybe not standard practices as they see it. What do you think we need to improve through the NRCS and others to help them have the flexibility installing the practices on their land that are actually tailored to what they need instead of maybe what the book says?
That's a great question because farming, as you know, each year's different, each season's different, and it's not in a book somewhere. And so I think through training and some mentoring programs, and whether it's through an association like ours that can filter down to other state associations and try to get some training and get those staff people out to the farms. I mean, I've always told anybody, if you want to come out to the farm and drive the tractor or combine, I'll let you do it for free. And so get them out there and have them understand the practices and the technologies and where we want to go in technology. Because
internships on the farm maybe, huh? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess what we're really looking at is that sometimes you're running into inflexibility or lack of knowledge, and so you got a hard and fast rule that doesn't allow the type of things that would be actually beneficial and towards the goals of the conservation, but also help the farmers thrive. And you're finding that, you're running into walls sometimes.
Yeah, like a good example would be the CRP program. And so you have a 10-year contract for CRP, you've planted your CRP, you got it up, and then let's say you get into a drought situation. And so you're in this drought, your CRP's dying, and you don't really have much, whether it's technical assistance, financial assistance, to help reestablish those plants that you planted. So then the farmers are led, now what? Now I'm in trouble, I have no flexibility in the program, and I need to make sure that I either get it established or I have to pay it back. And so that becomes very difficult for farmers. And so there needs to be ways, especially when you have natural disasters, whether it's fire, wind, however you want to categorize it. And so there definitely needs to be more flexibility in the programs and a little bit more assurances through quality assurances across state lines on how can we make these and how is it not one size fits all.
Interesting, yeah, because through no fault of their own, but the conditions, maybe it's a drought, maybe some other, natural disaster, hurricane or whatever, tornado, earthquake where I'm from, that could change their ability to fulfill as they would have desired to do, and all of a sudden they're in trouble. So, okay, well, I appreciate that. That gives us something to go with here. So please, and anybody on the panel, you're nodding your head too, send your thoughts along as I've run myself out of time here. But as we formulate the next farm bill and these conservation programs, that we help us to build in the flexibility and adaptability. Nobody's trying to work around the program or take advantage of it in a malicious way. Just things do happen. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for an additional 5 minutes. And I just want to do some follow-up with some straightforward questions that I'm asking more for the record than for anything else as we move into the future. Mr. Crowder, you've talked a lot about direct hire authority. Can you just give us a brief rundown of what that would mean and why that matters?
Madam Chair, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's 700 to 1,000 NRCS employees that they're down. They've filled 500 or 600 a year, but the attrition rate, they're not gaining on attrition rate. So we have to have that authority through the NRCS to make sure that they can very quickly fill positions throughout the United States to make sure that those field offices are full. And the other issue is not just direct hire authority, but the amount that they're paying the folks. In Washington State, a new employee would make $24,000 more if they worked for the state of Washington than the NRCS. So they're losing engineers and other specific employees because there's not enough funds there to compete with the private or other federal agencies.
So it sounds like there needs to be continued conversation about pay structure, pay bands as well. And now, Mr. Weiss, I'm going to go to you with a bit of a follow-up. You said something in an answer, I think it was to Mr. Allen's question, where you're talking about the short, intense graze and like what you have seen in terms of dead grass, kind of worrisome terrain just getting eaten up and then new growth come in. Can you just speak to that a little bit? For those who maybe don't spend time either working the land with cattle or don't, their crops in their district are not necessarily livestock, and they don't spend a lot of time on ranches. Could you just sort of walk through how some of these programs in the day-to-day function, and I'm talking really like 101 discussion, again, for the record, how they facilitate what it is that you do with the added benefit of carbon sequestration and support to soil and also allow you to keep the waterways clear?
Thank you. I think cattle are underappreciated for their value to upcycle nutrients. They're taking fiber, cellulose in the plants and digesting it, which we cannot do, and they are turning it into nutritious protein source for us. And while they do that, they are providing nutrients back into the soil to promote organic matter and prosperity. So, for us, in terms of rotating cattle, there's a lot of benefit in terms of what they call take half, leave half in terms of plants. So how our cattle ranch operates is we turn cattle into a pasture. It's a lot of visual appraisal and making sure that we don't graze it down to the dirt. And after about anywhere from 5 to 10 days, we move them to a different pasture. And it's a constant cycle depending on the growing season. If you have cool season grasses versus warm season grasses, you have to adjust that all year long. And we truly are promoting the root systems to go deeper. We're promoting green leaf blades to emerge to capture sunlight. That is key in carbon sequestration. And it's really not that complicated if you look at it just from a cattleman's perspective. It doesn't have to be this real scientific process. So I would invite anybody, if they'd love to come witness this at our cattle operation. We intensively graze as long as we can, fall, spring, summer grazing, and it's something I think a lot of young cattlemen and women can integrate into their business to become more profitable.
It's quite a sight to really spend time on a cattle operation and to see exactly what you're talking about, and even going back to your opening comments in terms of the balance of environmental benefits and benefits to the operation, social benefits, all the rest, even just the ability to know where your cattle are at any given time and be able to rotate them through smaller pastures. That's the folks on the ground have been just so vital. And I thank all of the cattlemen across Virginia who have spent a lot of time educating me on the benefits that their work has to the local economy, culture, society, and ultimately to our food sources. The ranking member has a dueling hearing, has excused himself, so I'm going to continue forward towards adjournment. And he is foregoing a closing statement, but again, conveys his appreciation, as do I. Thank you. To follow up on what Ranking Member LaMalfa was saying, I do want to thank all of our farmers. I think that farmers do need a lot more credit, as do foresters, for the work that they do to protect our natural resources, the work that they do looking after the land, and frankly, the work that they do to feed our fellow Americans. I want to thank all of you for being here today. You've provided really thoughtful insights regarding the USDA's conservation programs, and certainly as we look ahead to the 2023 Farm Bill, we want to make sure that we're informing any changes, adjustments, modifications to these programs based on what's working, what's not working. And I think that we have all heard very loud and clear timelines, responsiveness, flexibility, hiring flexibility, recognition that different areas, regions, and in fact, types of crops produced really might dictate the needs for flexibility so that producers on the ground can make the most of these programs. Your thoughts on what is working and is not working is so helpful to us as we try to make these policies stronger and as we work to ensure that they do work for producers. And as we are looking to find, on-farm efficiencies, boost the bottom line for producers, and make sure that we have an eye on combating the climate crisis with, the first conservationists, who of course are our nation's farmers and producers. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is now adjourned.